All right, I hope folks can see our screen okay. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Catherine Diaz. I'm the Deputy Director for Community Affairs here at the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. We're incredibly excited to start today's webinar to talk about grant readiness and what are how to access funding opportunities from the state, and most specifically the Community Grants Reinvestment Fund, which we'll talk about further. For today's presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about our office and our work. For some folks who are in the chat, I know you're familiar with the work that we do and who we are and our mission as an agency. For others, we may be really new and folks are curious to learn more about our work. So we'll walk you through a little bit about that. I'm also going to then pass the presentation over to the Director of the Community Grants Reinvestment Fund, Matt Wilson, who will share a little bit about himself. And then we'll cover what it is to talk about SFS and state procurement opportunities, particularly for organizations who are new to accessing state funding opportunities, have never applied, and are curious about the process. We're going to be walking through step by step how to do so, as well as resources available. We're going to be monitoring the chat, as I said, for any questions and technical difficulties that do come up. And at some portion in the middle, we may pause depending on the questions that we do receive, but please feel free to throw them in the chat as they come up. We will certainly at the end take all of the questions and answers you may have for us today. And so we will get started. As I mentioned, the New York State Office of Cannabis Management is a new agency. For some folks are really familiar with our work and who may know us from our role in regulating cannabis across New York State. In 2021, the New York State legislature, passed what is the MRTA, or the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which legalized adult use cannabis in New York, and did so with an emphasis on social and economic justice. The MRTA is historic in that it automatically expunged past marijuana convictions. It set a 50% benchmark for all adult use or recreational licenses in New York State, and it acknowledged the deep impact and loss that neighborhoods across the state experienced because of past cannabis policies, and thus for set up what is called the Community Grants Reinvestment Fund. As I mentioned, it did so with the understanding and acknowledgement that communities across the state were disproportionately impacted by past federal and local drug policies. And so from every legal cannabis sale, after the cost of implementation, tax revenue is deposited into this fund. As you can see on the screen, that means that 20% goes to drug treatment and public education, which is administered by by OASIS, which is the Office of Addiction and Support Services. We have 40% going towards towards education through the New York State Department of Education. And lastly, the 40% is for the Community Grant Reinvestment Fund, which outlines a broad list of projects that can be supported by that 40% fund, and is led by nonprofit and community-based organizations. The list is quite long in the statute. We encourage a lot of folks to go online and check it out. It can support everything from capital and programmatic expenses to senior centers, after schools, infrastructures, linkage to care, a really long, broad list to ensure that neighborhoods that were disproportionately affected and impacted across the state are able to reinvest and rebuild. In addition to the 40%, and in addition to the community reinvestment fund, from every single adult use cannabis sale, there's an additional 13% and 4% of tax revenue that is distributed to the state and local county. So by the end of this month and this year, the New York State cannabis market would have surpassed just a little over $2 billion. Which is a huge feat for folks who have been following the work of our office and the growth of the industry itself. And with the continued growth of the industry, we recognize that the Cannabis Tax Revenue Fund and the local excise tax are also a huge source of revenue for counties across the state. For example, in just 9 months, the town of Babylon on Long Island had $1.2 million that went towards a new treatment center and drug education and prevention work. And while we don't have numbers on hand at this moment for all of the counties and cities that are represented here in today's webinar, we recognize that it is a huge source of revenue that we encourage folks to connect with their local elected officials or county representatives to learn more about the tax revenue that is directed at the local level and how it is being utilized. A lot of folks ask us about, who administers, who manages this fund. And so the Cannabis Advisory Board was established to govern and administer the fund itself. It's made up of 13 volunteer appointees who discuss and vote to shape the fund's priorities and its future. They meet throughout the year across the state, and you can go onto our website or scan the QR code on your screen in front of you to learn about their upcoming meetings, who serves on the board, and some of the and a lot of our agendas and past minutes of items that they've discussed in reference to the fund, but also to cannabis in general across New York State. So whether you join, and their meetings are public, so you can join either via live stream or in person. They do meet in different regions across the state throughout the year. And we encourage a lot of nonprofit organizations to do so, to be able to have, a seat and visibly see how the CAB is discussing the fund, how they see its priorities. While they don't formally have a public session at every meeting, we do encourage folks to reach out through our website and email that is listed. And I'll now pass it over to my colleague, Matt Wilson, to introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Matt Wilson. I am the director of the Community Grants Reinvestment Fund. Just a little bit about myself. I spent 20 years in private philanthropy, largely at the Open Society Foundations. I was working there to support advocacy organizations working to change drug laws, including the organizations that supported the passage of the Marijuana Regulation and Tax Act. I absolutely love the Community Grants Reinvestment Fund, and that the Marijuana Regulation and Tax Act established it as this engine of reparative justice coming out of the legal market. So I'm really excited about this opportunity, and I want to tell you a little bit about what you can expect for this next funding cycle. While we will present here some high-level key points, when the RFA is released in early 2026, likely somewhere in the second half of February, I encourage you to read it very closely. While what we say here will be consistent with what's in the RFA will offer a lot more detail and nuance to many of the points that we raise. So next slide, please, Kathy. So the first thing that I always start with and come back to whenever we talk about the Community Grants Reinvestment Fund is its fundamental purpose. And the purpose is stated directly in the law, in State Finance Law 99 KK4. You can go read a paragraph there that really outlines what's the purpose of the fund and the type of things we can support. But the key line is that this fund's purpose is to reinvest in communities disproportionately affected by past federal and state drug policies. That purpose is what we try to keep in the center of our focus whenever we think about how to design an RFA. And so with that, we are looking for applications that serve communities that have been over-policed in the drug war. We can find these communities all across the state of New York. And of course, data and research suggests that the disproportionate impact of drug law enforcement fell predominantly on Black, brown, and poor New Yorkers. But we can find drug war harmed communities all over the state. There are two ways that we encourage applicants to think about the population that they will serve. to be in alignment with this fund. First, the office developed a series of maps around communities disproportionately impacted by prior cannabis arrest. If you click on the QR code there, it will take you to a map where we have identified specific census tracts all across the state where the cannabis arrest rate was higher than the state average. So these are census tract areas where cannabis enforcement was disproportionate to the rest of the state. Individuals from those communities have had certain access into the licensed cannabis market, but it is also a really good indicator for the Community Grants Reinvestment Fund of the population and the neighborhoods that we are trying to serve with this money. We also recognize that there are drug war harmed communities outside of those high priority CDI areas. And so in your application, you can certainly explain your priority population, how they have been overpoliced and negatively affected by past drug laws, just using available data sources, your own historical analysis, or community indicators that you've collected on your own. So again, the map is very helpful. If you are doing work in a CDI area, there will be an opportunity to name that and lift that up in your application. If you are not working directly in those CDI areas, you just need to make sure to explain clearly to us how the population you're trying to serve has been harmed in the drug war. Next slide, please. Okay, who and what we fund. So these are the priorities that the Cannabis Advisory Board passed for this funding round. It is similar to last year's sort of programmatic areas with the addition of 2 more. So for this coming funding cycle, eligible entities are 501c3 nonprofit organizations working with youth, and we define youth as 0 to 24. And their family. I'm getting some note, looks like their audio. FYI. Are people able to hear me? Kathy, are you able to hear me?
Okay, yes.
Good. I just wanted to make sure that I could be heard. Okay, cool. I'm seeing yes. Great. So 501c3 nonprofits working with youth, defined as 0 to 24, as well as their families, in these 5 core areas: mental health, substance use disorder services, harm reduction in particular, housing, and workforce development. Yeah. So when you apply to us, your project needs to connect to one of these 5 areas and focused on youth and their families. Yeah, that is kind of the high level prioritization and eligibility that all applications need to address to be eligible for this funding. Next slide, please, Kathy. So while we have those 5 programmatic areas, I want to say that we welcome applications from a wide range of programmatic interventions. We do not take a very narrow definition of what we mean by mental health support, what we mean by housing, what we mean by substance use disorder. Those are really sort of the big project areas, but you are welcome to address those project areas in a wide range of approaches. So on this screen, we just list a few ways you can think about applying. So it could be direct case management, it could be providing technical assistance, maybe after school services, prevention efforts, drop-in centers, emergency housing, financial literacy, workforce development, legal services, learning fees. We even allow cash assistance programs. So if you're working with the population and you want to do some sort of direct cash assistance, we're open to that. So really, while you do need to be constrained to those 5 programmatic areas, we really welcome a wide array of approaches to how you think that work can best be done, and we encourage you to do that. Another question we often get, does your proposal have to be a new project, or can you apply for funding for an ongoing project? The answer is both are absolutely fine. You do not need to invent a project just for us. You are welcome to invent a project. If you have a new project in mind that you want to seek funding for, we will absolutely review that application. If you already have a program that is functioning in one of these areas and you feel it could use more resources or it could scale differently, by all means apply with that in mind as well. Next slide, please. So if you want to know what we funded in the last funding cycle, to just get an idea of the type of projects that we supported, I encourage you to visit the awardee booklet. If you scan this code or go to the website there, you can read an executive summary about each of the organizations and each of the projects that we supported. So I encourage you to go there. You can read a bit about the overall project, where we funded across the state. There's kind of a dashboard level view. So really check that out. It might be a good way to kind of tune into the type of projects we support. Next slide, Kathy. Okay, so here and on the next slides, we're going to get into a little bit of detail. So to be eligible, the lead applicant, and I'll come back to this lead applicant, needs to be a 501c3 nonprofit providing youth services in the state of New York. You can be a nationwide organization. We get that question sometimes, but we are looking for your New York focused efforts. And you need to have a minimum organizational expenditure of $50,000. We'll cover that in more detail on the next slide. Ineligible, we are not this time able to fund individuals directly, government agencies, or private businesses. So at this moment, the opportunity is really limited to just 501c3s. I see some questions there about faith-based, non-faith-based. Again, if you are a 501c3, you are eligible. We also certainly encourage collaborations and fiscally sponsored projects. So this lead applicant is really the applicant who will apply in their name and be the entity that would receive a contract from the state if the application was awarded. However, we ask a question on the application and we welcome partnerships. So if you wanted to form a collaboration with 3 or 4 organizations, you just need to designate one organization that would be the lead applicant, that would be responsible to sign a contract with the state, but you would be welcome to then suballocate, subcontract funding received to the other projects. Same with fiscally sponsored projects. If you are a fiscally sponsored project, you can have your fiscal sponsor apply as the lead applicant. And in the application, you just need to explain X organization is the fiscal sponsor, the real project is being pursued by the fiscally sponsored effort, and then explain exactly what that project will do. And then, of course, in a budget, if the fiscal sponsor takes some administrative fee, just, detail out those things. But we welcome collaborations, fiscally sponsored projects. So, yeah, think about that. And if for some reason you maybe don't have a $50,000 expenditure, you can pursue a collaboration. Okay. So this slide has a bit of information. I kind of want to try to make it as simple as possible. Last year, everyone applied to the organization in one application pool. And that meant that smaller organizations were competing in the same pool as much larger organizations. And we are certainly aware that much larger organizations may have more resources to dedicate toward completing the application. And they may have, full-time grant writers, while small organizations might be in a different situation. So we want to make sure that medium to small size organizations really have a chance of getting awarded, and not just larger organizations. So this year we are dividing the applicant pool into two tiers. Both tiers apply in the exact same way. Both tiers are evaluated according to the same criteria. But when we go to make selection decisions, we will divide the applicant pool into tier 1 and tier 2. Tier 1 are organizations with an operating expenditure less than $2.5 million. And I assume most on the call are familiar with your operating expenditures. It is basically how much money did your organization spend in the previous fiscal year. We are using that as a measure of how big your organization is. If you are a tier 1 organization, if that means your operating expenditure is less than $2.5 million, you really need to pay attention to this award schedule. Depending on the size of your organization will determine the size of the grant amount you can apply for. So if your organization has an operating expenditure of less than $200,000, you should really find and locate yourself in the award schedule, and then there on the column on the right, you will be able to understand how much you can apply for. The reason for this is we want to be mindful that our funding doesn't represent an overly large percentage of your overall funding composition. There's a number of reasons we want to make sure that we're not more than 50%. So we've sort of created this table to make the opportunity available for small organizations, but also make sure the size of our grant is proportional to the size of the organization. If you're a tier 2 organization, that means you have an operating expense of $2.5 million or more. You are eligible to apply for up to $100,000. All grants are for a 2-year cycle, so the contract will be for 2 years. It is not prorated, so over that 2-year period, you are able to spend the funds at whatever rate and timeline makes most sense for your project. Yeah. I think I'll leave it there. Application. So we will again issue the RFA in early 2026. While the information we provided here should be consistent with the RFA will provide all the details. So please read it closely. When you apply, there will be 3 main sections to the application. The first section, we want to learn about your organization and its history, particularly the history of your organization working with the community you are proposing to serve. And the second part of the application, we want to hear about your project and what you are proposing to really do with the funding. And then in the third section, of course, we need a budget to understand how you will use the funds. And of course, we are looking to see that your budget and the project proposal have some clear alignment. So it's obvious to us that what you're proposing to do and what your budget is requesting are sort of clearly in sync with each other. 2 things I want to make sure everyone hears about some priorities for us. In your application, please be prepared to explain how your organization and leadership has roots in communities that has faced disproportionate harms in the drug war. And then second, be prepared to explain how your proposal really seeks to reinvest in communities that have been harmed in the drug war. So again, we're looking for organizations that really have roots and a strong presence in drug war harmed communities, and that are seeking to really reinvest in those communities through a range of services, programs, and approaches. Again, targeting youth and those 5 programmatic areas. Kathy, I think that is it for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. And I think we can respond to this question perhaps now. There was a question in terms of what the grant period is. Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? If you can, we can respond to that now.
Yeah, so it's a 2-year grant period. Not exactly sure when we would have the contract start time, but we will publish that in the RFA. I think the contract start time would be later, probably in the 3rd or 4th quarter of 2026, because it takes us a bit of time to go through the full evaluation process and then issue the contract. I also saw a question here about whether current awardees can apply. And I actually in the chat saw that we are joined by a few current awardees. The answer is no. If you received a Community Grants Reinvestment Fund award from the last funding cycle, you are not eligible to apply in this cycle. The reason that is because we were quite delayed in getting that funding out. And if you're a current awardee, you know that funding really just started to become available. And so this application is really quite soon after those projects have started. So you're not eligible in this particular round. However, it is absolutely our intention that in future rounds, those that received an award in the first round will be eligible, because we understand the importance of continued funding.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. I think those are some of the outstanding questions. I know folks are in the chat readily responding to any others. If there are still pieces that are unclear or unanswered, please throw them in the chat and we can, of course, answer them live towards the end of the webinar. I think something importantly that we always mention when we're in person, particularly if you didn't know, if there are folks in your organization or colleagues in your areas that wanted to join that couldn't join today, we do these in person as well. We're just getting started across the state. And so at the end, we'll have an email where folks can reach out to get our schedule, to go onto our website where you can find where we'll be hosting more of these grant readiness sessions. In addition, I think something we do also get asked a lot is, does it have to be for cannabis work or cannabis focused youth work? And the answer is no. We certainly welcome any projects that have to do with cannabis that meet the criteria for this RFA, but it does not have to be around cannabis. So whether you have as I saw a BioBus in the chat, right, a mobile program, we have mental health programs in the chat, we have arts organizations, any of your existing work that is youth related can be submitted for consideration.
And Kathy, I see a few of these other questions, so maybe let me answer them. I see questions around the 2-year contract cycle. So every contract is for 2 years. It really depends. The award size can depend on the size of your organization. But let's say you qualify and are awarded $100,000 for the 2 years. It is not $50,000 for the first year and $50,000 for the second year. It is $100,000 over 2 years. If that means you spend, because of your project, all the $100,000 in the first year, so be it. If that means you spend all the $100,000 in the later part of the grant cycle, that's also okay. It's $100,000 over that 2 years, and how you spend it is really based on what your project needs in order to be achievable. The other thing I saw here that I want to answer, what if your organization doesn't have a $50,000 expenditure? So if your organization has not had $50,000 in previous year expenditure, you are not eligible to apply as the lead applicant. However, nothing prevents you from applying in collaboration with other organizations or with a fiscal sponsor of some arrangement. I don't want small organizations to be discouraged from trying to apply for the fund. At this moment, we are just not able to really service the needs of very small organizations looking to build in future years. But if you fall below that 50,000 threshold, by all means, think about a collaboration, think about a fiscally sponsored arrangement in order to access the funding here.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. And as we shared, please continue with it to add in the chat. We'll respond to towards the later half of the presentation. And next up, we wanted to be able to talk about state funding opportunities and how to access. So while Matt has walked us through how do folks actually apply and for this opportunity, but not just with our office, also with any other state agency. And all organizations who are interested in doing business with the state and receiving funding opportunities need to register for what is called SFS, or the Statewide Financial System. This is where you're able to find grant opportunities, where you're able to complete a step that's called pre-qualification. For some agencies, you can even manage your contracts and receive electronic payment. Some organizations here may be really familiar, others newer. So we hope that this presentation you're able to kind of gain some either new knowledge, or it's a nice refresher for some folks who are joining us today. This is a little bit of what SFS kind of looks like. It's a very simple interface. That does not mean that it is the easiest to navigate, but it is a bit of a simple interface where you find different tiles on your screen once you register and are able to access the system that allow you to manage different components related for your organization. So whether that's claims, whether that's finding grant opportunities, or what I mentioned earlier was the pre-qualification process. This is a new-ish system for the state. For folks who have been in nonprofit space for a long time, there was the grant management system. And so now we have, I want to say, almost 2 years, I think, that the state's transitioned over here to SFS. And so you'll be able to find everything convenient on this one page. I mentioned a required step that is called pre-qualification, and it is one that all organizations, after you register and make an account for SFS, have folks on, whether you're a large organization, small organization, anyone who is working on grants or contracts within your organization would register in SFS. And then there is pre-qualification, which is a separate step after registration. We, and I think many other agencies, really beat the drum in talking about pre-qualification, because it is a step that many organizations do tend to get stuck at. There are many folks who spend hours, right, drafting, reviewing grant applications, and then often find at the last hour that they're not able to submit or be considered because of pre-qualification. So we're going to take some time to walk through this today and also share some resources for it. And essentially, pre-qualification is just a step where you submit documentation about your organization and its standing. As I said, many organizations lose out on opportunities because it's a step that's not completed in a timely fashion. And so it's something that has to be done at the time of the deadline, prior to the deadline and your submission. Otherwise, your organization's application will not be considered. It's not always a one and done step. For some folks, if you have been pre-qualified in the past, you must log in, review, and make sure to check the date on the expiration of your pre-qualification. It's something that requires monitoring and reviewing. The first step of, as I mentioned, folks have to register into SFS. It's fairly simple to do so. On the website, there is a form that has to be completed and a W-9. It needs to be signed by your organizational head and emailed to the SFS team and the email that is on the screen in front of you. Whether that's an executive director, chief equity officer, whoever, I mean, excuse me, chief executive officer, if that is who you have as your agency head, they must complete that and submit it. It can take a few days to receive a response, which is why we always stress for folks to start early. There are moments of the year at the state where it's a really high period, right, in terms of grant opportunities and grant cycles. And so we always encourage folks to keep that in mind when you do see multiple grants out from the state, that whether it's at the end of the year or in the spring, just to be cognizant of that. The second step, and really key here, is to assign user roles in SFS. So once your agency head, your primary contact, registers, submits that, they're going to receive credentials over an email. Your primary contact will then can delegate additional users and roles. It's important and critical that the correct roles are added to those who process and complete the grants on behalf of an organization so that timely alerts are received. You can also add a role just for someone who is focused on pre-qualification or any additional paperwork. This is a space that, for example, if you have had turnover in your organization, you really want to be able to review who has access to SFS. If maybe somebody, especially now over the holidays, folks may be going out on leave, make sure you can always add additional users onto SFS so that you don't miss alerts if there are new documents that need to be uploaded or paperwork that needs to be amended. And the third step, of course, is pre-qualification. As you can see, there is an additional site that the state has that walks folks through pre-qualification and what that means. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a list of required documents that need to be submitted that demonstrate your standing. When you do so, you have to select a state agency. We, as an agency, the New York State Office of Cannabis Management, is not one that is listed on there yet. And so we encourage anyone to just choose an agency that most aligns with your mission, whether that is, there's, over 50 state agencies, so I can't list them all, but you can find the list online, select them. That does not preclude you from being able to apply for our grant opportunities. The first step is to really review what are the documents that you need for pre-qualification. You can go onto the website as you see, and it's here listed. You can scan it. After, of course, we'll share some of those resources and links over email. Some of them are really common ones that folks have, such as your certificate of incorporation. But it also includes, for example, profile of your board of directors, your organizational chart, your audit, your IRS 990, your 501c3. So really you want to be able to take stock of what are the number of documents needed and that they're requesting so you can get that prepared in advance. There are also on that website that's listed a ton of templates and examples of equivalent documents that can be uploaded. If some of these documents are newer to you or you're just not certain, they walk you through what might be some alternatives, as well as even templates that you can complete, for example, when it comes to an organizational chart, if you don't have one that's handy. As you can see here, this is what that screen in SFS looks like when you do complete pre-qualification and upload. So as I said, it's a really simple interface. You'll see each one listed and you're able to attach the document to it. You can add comments as well and be able to see on the left-hand side, as you can see, the different components when completing pre-qualification. The second step, and this is not universal, is that you may be asked to share additional policies and procedures. And this is all listed as well on that SFS website. So some folks, so they may ask you, a staff code of conduct, the board of directors conflict of interest policy. So if you have these handy, great. You can upload those as well as part of your SFS and pre-qualification process. If you don't have them handy, just be aware that you may be asked to upload those. Lastly, as we've said, monitor, monitor, monitor. There are documents, particularly your financial documents, that expire annually. You want to be able to know what dates those are and make sure that you're able to upload them in advance of, let's say, applying for this procurement. Because even if those 3 documents are the ones that have expired, that means that you are not currently pre-qualified. And so it's really critical to take note of when the expiration dates are for your documents, and where your organization is at, which is why we mentioned, for example, you can have a person who is simply tasked with pre-qualification and SFS and will receive those alerts. Our last tip that sounds very simple and common sense is don't forget to hit submit. It is actually, and I'll show in the next screen, that there's a small button on the bottom. So it's, like I said, it's a simple interface. You may upload everything and it's like, okay, I'm done, but there's actually a submit button. And once you submit the application, you're going to receive an email. Your status in SFS is going to change. We encourage folks to check that, to have a status check quite frequently. And you will receive emails regarding your pre-qualification approval as well. There may be a need for more information. Perhaps there might be something that's missing from a document. Maybe it's not legible. Again, via email, via SFS, stay close, stay on it with the folks from the SFS team who will be monitoring and may request for folks for more information. It's really important for folks, as we've said, to start early. The more time that there might be a back and forth, that adds time to the SFS pre-qualification approval. So you really want to make sure that if you do receive an alert for additional information, that you do respond in a timely fashion, so that once all the paperwork is in, they have sufficient time for review and approval. And this is that very small button all the way on the bottom that folks might have to scroll to find your submission for pre-qualification. So just make sure you don't miss it and that you continue to monitor as you complete it. On the left-hand side, as you can see, the different spaces. There are many new supportive tools that came out with the SFS transition and for pre-qualification. For example, there's a section on the website that's called the SFS Coach. It includes training videos, there are guidance documents, and a full review of that website. So if you're a learner that just loves the YouTube and being able to pause and play, there is that readily available, as well as different components of and long guidance documents for every component of SFS, not just pre-qualification. There is also a help desk. So you can contact via email, via phone, if this is a core part of your role at your organization, not just perhaps pre-qualification, not just for this grant opportunity, for example, where you readily do use SFS. They also have weekly support calls on different topics about SFS, and have really fostered that community in terms of guidance and understanding. So how to apply for OCM's funding opportunities. So as I mentioned, we have SFS register, we have pre-qualification, that required step. In order to actually apply, OCM's opportunity is going to be listed on a site that's called eGrants. So we will not be receiving submissions through SFS. And eGrants, while it's not available quite yet, it's where our funding opportunities will be. It will launch soon. And so very similarly, we will be doing a webinar. We'll have PowerPoints in terms of just and different materials available around the eGrants site. It has a similar registration process as SFS, in which we do request for the agency head to complete. As you can see, this is what a little bit of eGrants looks like. And so it includes a form with with the head of the organization. If you're already registered in SFS, we will request for that SFS supplier ID number. If the organization is not yet registered in SFS, once you receive approval from eGrants and your credentialing, we'll make note of that in the email of, hey, you're not yet registered in SFS, be sure to complete that next step. So you'll also receive that alert if you're not certain if your organization has been registered in SFS yet. And I should also add, really similar to SFS, is that you'll also be able to use distinct user roles. So that way, your agency head may do the SFS, may do eGrants, but if there are different members of your team that are completing different portions of the process, then you'll be able to add the user roles as well. And supporting the Community Reinvestment Fund. As I mentioned earlier, the fund is powered by legal cannabis sales. And so for folks who may be really familiar, you can go onto our website, you can find a list of all of the licensed cannabis dispensaries across the state, and where they are within your community. And so part of our agency has really been driving folks, community members, to understand that legal cannabis sales and the revenue from legal cannabis sales comes directly back to our communities. We recognize, particularly with youth organizations that are joining us today, that there is a lot of concern around illicit dispensary sales. No legal cannabis shop sells to minors under the age of 21. This is a market that is focused on 21 plus. And so we do encourage folks, if you did not know, on our website, you can report anonymously on our incident reporting form, whether it's a concern about a cannabis business, legal or not, about products that you're seeing in your neighborhood or in the schools in your neighborhoods, and of course, any adverse health effects that you have seen or witnessed. And so, as I've said, those can all be reported on our website anonymously, or you can share your information. Where can you find grant opportunities, and particularly when we do launch our opportunity? I noticed some folks in the chat have asked about, is there a listserv? And absolutely, all of your emails will be added to that listserv so that when the opportunity does launch, you will receive an email about it. We also encourage folks to check out the New York State Contract Reporter. It is a free website where you can sign up, and anyone can sign up for it, that really outlines all state funding opportunities, whether that is even for private businesses who are looking for state contract opportunities, or for nonprofits. Um, and you're able to also now show on the next screen here, filter for those. And so whether that's our office or any state agency, this is really kind of like that master list, if you will, of all grant opportunities that exist. You'll find them here. You can click on them and it'll take you directly to that agency's information and site. Lastly, I mentioned, while we are a new all-state office, there is another new state office that has been a really great partner for us, which is the New York State Office of Faith and Nonprofit Services. If you're not yet plugged in, we highly encourage folks to check them out. And their mission is really to support the capacity of nonprofit organizations and faith-based spaces. They lead advocacy with agencies to resolve issues of the sector, and they also have many grant opportunities. So on their site, you'll find a newsletter, for example, where if they are issuing their own funding opportunities, where they highlight other funding opportunities from state agencies as well, and have contract management specialists on staff to support organizations in SFS in navigating the state procurement process. If there are just a level of kind of personalized, tailored support that you need that perhaps you may not be receiving through SFS, we encourage folks to reach out to the New York State Office of Faith and Nonprofit Services. We'll also be able to share their website after this webinar as well. And we're coming to the end of our presentation for today. We do encourage folks to stay connected to our office. This is just one of the many components of our work and our mission at the State Office of Cannabis Management. As I said, on our website, you can sign up for our listserv. We will certainly add you all today to that group for around the Community Grants Reinvestment Program. Here we have our events at ocm.ny.gov. As I mentioned at the start, we're going to be doing this in person. We are a small, nimble, grassroots team that is really dedicated to making sure that all neighborhoods are aware. So if you're definitely interested in having our team present, not just for the community grants reinvestment, but really to bring more information about the mission, about the agency, and about our work, please reach out. We attend, whether that's community resource fairs, we town halls, presentations, workshops on all of the components of our agency's work. We're all across the state. We have team members and offices in Buffalo, Albany, and in New York City, covering the downstate region. And of course, social media. We have a pretty robust comms team that on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, really brings out the latest and greatest out of our office. So we do encourage folks to also connect with us and follow us on socials. Certainly, when the Community Grants Reinvestment RFA does launch, you'll also see it on socials and across all of our platforms. Thank you so much, folks, for joining us today. I do want to just take a pause on any questions that there may have been around the SFS, around pre-qualification, of course, as well on the reinvestment fund.
So let me jump in, Kathy. While you were presenting, I went through a lot of the chat and want to try to address a number of the questions there. So let me just kind of start to jump in to responses. One question was about multiple issue applications. Can you submit a proposal that seeks to address multiple of those program areas? Yes, you absolutely can. We recognize that many of those areas are quite intersectional with one another. You do have to identify a primary programmatic area when you apply, but in your application, again, if your work is both mental health and housing, that's absolutely fine. You just need to select one as your primary area, but we will evaluate all of those sort of on equal standing with each other. Saw a lot of questions about, what about this type of entity? What about that type of entity? You have to be a 501c3. If you're not a 501c3, you're not eligible to apply for this opportunity. If you are a 501c3, you are eligible to apply. So I saw a question there about like a school district. School district is a government entity. So at this moment, you are not eligible to apply. However, you could certainly form a partnership with a nonprofit, and the nonprofit, the 501c3, can be the entity to apply as the lead applicant. Same with for-profits. I saw the question, can a for-profit partner with a nonprofit and apply? Yes, you can. So long as the nonprofit, the 501c3, is the lead applicant, if they want to propose a partnership with a for-profit entity, you're welcome to propose that, explain it all in the application. One application per organization. I also saw that question. Can an organization submit multiple applications for different projects? The answer is no. You can submit one application per organization. Your application can cover multiple counties or multiple areas. That's a change from last year, but it is one application per organization. If you're using a fiscal sponsor, the fiscal sponsor's budget is what we will use to determine grant size. The operating expense we are looking at is for the whole organization, not just a part or a project within the organization. So we are looking at the organization's overall size. There was a good question there I'm muted. Can you hear me now? Okay, cool.
Yes, we can hear you.
There was a question about whether or not the project need to serve CDI census tracts, or could their priority be the whole county? There is no requirement that your project serve CDIs. And again, we recognize that communities disproportionately impacted. OCM has a map where we could identify those CDIs. We also recognize that there are drug war harmed communities that live outside of those designated areas. So you are welcome to propose an application that is outside of a CDI area. However, in both applications, we want to hear how the population you are proposing to serve is a community that was harmed in the drug war. I saw another question there about, can we explain more about what rooted in the community means, and a question about a previous organization funded last year. Let me say, number one, really proud of all the organizations that we supported in the first round. We received over 450 applications. It was a really tough selection process. And at the same time, we are changing and adapting the application and how we focus this funding a bit differently than last year. While overall there's a lot of similarities, we have certainly revamped questions. We are really focusing more on having applicants identify CDI areas that they will serve. So this is not an exact replication of last year. We are learning, growing, adapting, and trying to get more focused in where the funding goes. All the grants are reimbursement basis. I'm sorry for that. That is a requirement by New York State. We will offer any awardee a 25% advance for the overall grant amount. So if you apply and receive a $100,000 award, you will be able to request a 25% to $25,000 advance payment at the start of the award. And then as you claim and submit receipts, we will recoup the 25% advance over subsequent payments. We certainly understand that reimbursement-based grants can create a cash flow challenge for organizations, and the best that we are able to do, according to guidance from the Office of the State Comptroller, is that 25% advance. So we do make that available. Got a question. Are the grants up to the amounts listed, or must you apply for the set amount? The answer is you have to apply for the set amount. While this year we are issuing grants at different sizes, we are only issuing grants at those specific amounts based on the size of your organization. So you do need to apply for the maximum amount available to your organization, depending on your organization's size. So I think those are all the questions I was able to sort of review before maybe more questions came in. I can see.
I was going to share, just a reminder, we do anticipate launching in early 2026. Part of our goal is been and hosting these info sessions. I think we started in right before the Thanksgiving holiday, so in mid-November, because we know that for many youth serving organizations, we're a brand new state agency that's not necessarily always on the radar. And so we really we're grateful for folks' attendance as we're being able to meet, even digitally, new organizations across the state. And so we're going to continue doing these in person. We anticipate early 2026, and particularly for those smaller organizations who've never done business with the state, this is a great time just to get started, whether about reading up on our work, on our past awardees, on the SFS process and what it necessarily requires. So that way, when we do launch, organizations across the state are in a great position to be able to apply. And this is just our second grant cycle. When we do launch, we will have what's called the formal bidders conference, which is at post once the RFA launches. It is a virtual webinar where we do respond to a lot of the questions and answers. Where we'll formally walk through all of the components of the RFA. So I do know that there are some questions in the chat that we may have not answered live. We anticipate that those will be answered through the RFA and the bidders conference process, and that does include, for example, how many awards are we issuing, for example, across the regions, across the tiers. So certainly that will be covered when the RFA is launched. Okay. And I think with that, again, I think the last slide that I do want to leave up before folks, oh, I think I missed it. Well, I'll send it digitally, but essentially our emails are on the screen. Our site is on the screen. Please stay connected with our office if you have any questions that were unanswered. Also, after this, we will have, you should receive a link for a feedback survey. And we appreciate all the feedback in terms of, any content that you were anticipating to receive that maybe was not covered, and just any feedback in general in terms of our office and our webinars. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Please stay connected to our work. We will have more of these in the new year, and we hope everybody has a great afternoon, a great holiday season, and can't wait to connect with a lot of you at the top of 2026. Thank you for joining us today.